Let's talk now about a controversial international agreement which hasn't been picking up too much attention by the mainstream media. I'm referring to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, known as TPP. While the Obama administration boasts about the trade benefits that come with a closer partnership with nations of the Pacific Rim, others are not as eager to jump on the TPP bandwagon, including American activists and even some members of Congress who are concerned over the secrecy surrounding the negotiations. Deputy U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Dimitrios Morantis spoke at the Woodrow Wilson Center today and had this to say when asked about the secrecy behind the negotiations.
One of the issues that comes up is why don't you release the negotiating text? There's a reason for that. When you're negotiating an agreement, if you're going to end up negotiating an agreement in public, it limits the ability of negotiators to have the flexibility to achieve the positions that are in the best interest of their country. And so that's why we're trying to strike a balance between ensuring the integrity of the negotiations, that we're not negotiating the TPP in the press, versus making sure that our stakeholders, whoever they are, whether they're from the business community, whether they're from NGOs, whether they're from labor unions, whether they're academics, have as much access to us, to the negotiators, as possible.
Well, that response was given after Melinda St. Louis, International Campaign Director for Public Citizens Global Trade, asked the question about secrecy. And Melinda joins me now here in the studio. Let me start just by asking your thoughts on his response.
Well, I think it's a misleading response in many ways. Well, one of the things that he said initially was, I'm proud of the level of transparency that we've had in these negotiations. And yet, there is much precedent for a much broader amount of transparency in the negotiations. In 2003, at this point, in negotiations of the Free Trade Area of the Americas, the entire draft text was released to the public. The World Trade Organization opens up draft texts to the public. So it's not an outrageous request that members of Congress and the public and press are asking for.
Yeah, certainly it's an interesting response to say that you feel that those involved in the negotiations don't want anything to come out. And I know, as you said, Ambassador Morantis said this has been the most transparent trade negotiation that has ever been negotiated. What could he be referring to?
Well, it's hard for us to understand because what we see is they have what you might call it a two-way mirror, where they will engage with stakeholders. They'll let us talk to them and tell them their opinions, but then we don't actually get to see what if they take those opinions into account or how they're going to address it. We can't actually give meaningful input if we don't know what's actually being negotiated. And that is the same position that Senator Wyden, the ranking member or the chair of the subcommittee in the Senate that deals with trade, has said to USTR and said, this has been common practice throughout the years for members of Congress to have access, and you're not giving me access to this text. And so this is not an outrageous position in any way, and it's been disappointing to see USTR dig in that position.
Certainly the transparency or lack thereof surrounding this, one of the major issues. But I know a lot of people tout the benefits of this, and some of the benefits I know listed today at the conference, better relations with Pacific Rim countries, setting global standards, benefiting working Americans. Do you think that these are fair assessments?
Well, I don't think that they're fair because I think there are many ways that you can create global partnerships. And one way that we don't think is the correct approach is to allow 600 corporate advisors to have access to the text, to write it, and to not let the rest of the population who, in all of the TPP countries, who will be affected by this agreement, have any say into what is actually happening.
And let me stop you there for a minute, just because we're talking about those people involved, the TPP countries. I want to put up a map showing the countries involved in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then there are also countries who are thinking about joining later in the process. So I guess just let me ask you why you think so many countries are willing to take part.
Well, at this point, it's 11 countries. It had been 9 countries. Mexico and Canada have just joined, though they are not even at the negotiating table for another 90 days. And other countries are looking into it. The United States is seeing this as, in a lot of ways, as the last trade agreement they ever negotiate. They want this a high standard agreement, as they're calling it, and that anyone who wants to trade with the United States would need to join. And so basically what we're looking at is something that could cover up to half of the world's population, and we need to know what the rules are in that agreement and what is actually being negotiated in our name.
From what you have been able to discover, what are you most concerned about?
Well, there's actually a host of concerns that have to do with the everyday life of people in this country and in other TPP countries. There are concerns that there was a leaked text on investment that would empower corporations to attack our public interest regulation, like environmental laws, public health laws, to take them to foreign tribunals and bypass our own domestic courts. There are concerns about increasing the price of medicines. They want to extend patents for large pharmaceutical companies so generic companies can't compete. They want to limit internet freedom, which was actually defeated in Congress, but it's a backdoor way to try to get that. There are concerns about banning Buy American preferences and Buy Local, so that if we're trying to increase American manufacturing, but in fact, we wouldn't be able to use our tax dollars to do that. And so there are a lot of incentives to actually offshore jobs, and that's partially why it's misleading to say that this is about trying to create jobs.
Let me just ask you about one of those things that you mentioned, the internet freedoms. We talk a lot about net neutrality here at RT, and as you said yourself, I mean, this was something that was not given the green light by Congress, and yet it would just be inserted into this bill. I mean, wouldn't Congress then have to vote on it eventually?
Well, the thing about these trade agreements is the way that they're negotiated. They're negotiated by the executive branch, and then what they want to do is bring it back for an up or down vote to Congress. So it's a huge, thousands of pages, 28 chapters, very little of it to do with trade for an up and down vote. And that's why Congress says we need to have influence at this stage, because it's too late after you have finished and signed on the dotted line. And we should actually have, and it's actually Congress's authority to decide what countries we negotiate agreements with and what the parameters of those agreements are. And what we're seeing is the executive really going off on its own, and it's going to be to their peril if they don't involve Congress early on, who are actually representing the people in the United States.
And I know you mentioned Ron Wyden, but are there other, senators and congressmen, speaking out about this, trying to get involved now?
There is actually a growing chorus, and just last month, 133 House Democrats, including almost all of the ranking members of the relevant committees, signed a letter to President Obama and the USTR saying that they wanted the process to be opened up and that they were concerned. Darrell Issa, Representative Issa from California, actually leaked part of the Internet Intellectual Property chapter on his website and tried to get into the negotiations himself in San Diego and was denied. And a group of senators, including Senator Wyden, but Senator Brown has also introduced legislation to try to open up the process and to bring Congress back into the process.
This has been going on for a while. Obviously, a lot of people are concerned, even on both sides of the aisle. Why do you think this isn't really being covered by most of the media?
Well, this has been a real disappointment for us in the public interest community. We've been really trying to bring this out. I mean, I think one of the challenges is the secrecy around it. It's hard for the media to take our word for it, take different people's word for it. They want to see the text themselves. I think it's also been in the interest of the administration to keep this under the radar, because these are not popular agreements, and particularly in an election year. The polling shows bipartisan across the board. People are very skeptical of these types of agreements after what they've seen with NAFTA, the destruction of American manufacturing in the United States over the past 20 years under these agreements, and to expand that model without rethinking what are ways to actually promote fair trade. It's not popular, so they're trying to keep it under the radar. It's really important.
Not the most sexy story, and as we know, that's what a lot of the media likes. It's a little bit detail-oriented, and as you said several times, just not enough information coming out about it. We appreciate you coming on the show to talk about it. Keep asking those questions and keep us posted on the developments of this. Melinda St. Louis, International Campaigns Director for Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. Thanks so much.